Hey guys, tonight we step into a quiet football field bathed in sunlight and hope. Rows of white folding chairs stretch across freshly mowed grass. Parents clutch tissue packets and cameras, their faces brimming with pride. I'm standing among them in a flowing sky blue dress, clutching a bouquet of lilies for my daughter Olivia. My heart races with a cocktail of nerves, joy, and disbelief. 18 years of motherhood are culminating in this moment, my baby girl walking across that stage to claim her diploma. But before the final name is called, before the camera flash immortalizes her beaming smile, my husband Richard clears his throat behind me. His voice is calm, too calm. "I have something I need to share," he says. I turn confused. Our friend's family and even a few of Olivia's teachers turn too. A hush falls over the field like a shroud. Then he says it. "I'm leaving Alexandra. I've found someone else." The world freezes. My breath catches. Somewhere behind me, a champagne cork pops with perfect comedic cruelty. The silence that follows is thick, electric. Olivia is standing on the stage, eyes scanning the crowd, unaware of the grenade that's just detonated behind her. My knees don't buckle. I don't scream. I don't even cry. I look at him, this man I've loved for 18 years, and I see nothing familiar in his face. But I don't move, not yet. Because in my purse, resting like a quiet bomb of my own, is a manila envelope. And when he opens it in front of everyone, he's the one who will scream. Let me take you back, because to understand the explosion, you have to know what built the fuse. I was Alexandra Hart when we met. A Connecticut girl from a middle-class family. My dad taught high school math. My mom was a nurse who worked night shifts and always smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion. They raised me with duty, discipline, and dreams. I earned a scholarship to Columbia and majored in business. I wanted to run a marketing firm. I wanted power client staff meetings, sleek portfolios with my name on them. And I was so close until I met Richard Mitchell. He was a law student with an impossible jawline, soft hands, and eyes that made you want to agree with him even when he was wrong. We met at a mutual friend's mixer. He was holding court in a circle of girls and still somehow found a way to notice only me. He asked about my major, told me I looked like a CEO, and when I laughed, he grinned like he'd won something. We fell fast. There were coffee dates that melted into midnight walks, long drives to nowhere, arguments about pizza crust thickness and U.S. foreign policy that somehow ended in kisses. 8 months later, he proposed on the rooftop of his Brooklyn apartment. Candles, a grocery store lasagna he'd pretended to cook. A ring that was too big but so full of promise it made me cry. We got married the following spring in a garden behind a rented chapel. My mom wore blue and cried. His dad gave a toast about legacy and commitment. Richard kissed my forehead and whispered, "We're going to build an empire." And we did. But I didn't realize it would be his. The first few years were busy buzzing with potential. I took a job at a boutique agency. He landed an associate position at a corporate law firm downtown. Our apartment was small, always a little cluttered, filled with Post-its tied takeout containers and whispered plans for our future. Then came Olivia. I found out I was pregnant 2 years into our marriage. I remember holding the test in the bathroom and laughing and crying all at once. Richard was thrilled. But soon the discussions began. Who would scale back? His job was demanding. Mine was flexible, he said. It made sense just for a while. Just until Olivia started school. But a while became a decade. I gave up my full-time job for part-time consulting. Then even that became rare. I ran the home, packed lunches, volunteered at Olivia's school, hosted dinner parties where Richard's colleagues praised the wine and I smiled like I hadn't cried in the pantry 20 minutes before. We moved to the suburbs when Olivia was 5. Colonial house, swing set, home office I barely used. I poured myself into being enough, and Richard, he rose. By the time Olivia was in middle school, he'd made partner. We took vacations in Tuscany. Olivia went to private school. I smiled in every Christmas card. I didn't realize the cracks until they became chasms. But we'll get there. First, let me tell you what it's like to watch your husband sit beside another woman at your daughter's graduation, to realize everyone else already knew, to see the pity in your best friend's eyes, and to know they all expect you to shatter. I didn't. Because this was his play. Mine was coming. And it started with the envelope. I didn't open that envelope right away. Not when I first found the receipts. Not when I saw the messages. Not even when I overheard the phone call. I waited. Not because I was weak or confused or unsure. I waited because I needed to be ready not just to leave him but to dismantle him. But let's rewind, because to understand how we got to that moment, you have to understand the foundation I laid, and how he used it to build a life that slowly erased me from it. Our marriage in the beginning was a beautiful, exhausting blur. We were a team, or at least I believed we were. We didn't have much money, but we had ambition. Richard was magnetic at networking events, always knowing the right thing to say. I, on the other hand, was the behind-the-scenes strategist, balancing the books, designing the holiday cards, managing every social function like it was a PR campaign. We weren't just building a family, we were building his brand. When Olivia was born, everything changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in increments. Like boiling water you don't realize is burning you until your skin starts to peel. He suggested I take maternity leave longer than expected. Just until Olivia sleeps through the night. Then it became, she's almost crawling. You should be here for that. Then, you're so good at this. Why hire help? And just like that, the dreams I had in my 20s started collecting dust in the attic of our big suburban house. I told myself it was worth it, that I was the architect of something sacred, that being a mother was the most important job in the world. And it is. But I stopped being Alexandra. I became Olivia's mom and Richard's wife. I baked themed birthday cakes from scratch. I remembered everyone's birthdays, even Richard's paralegal. I volunteered at every school fundraiser. I could tell you the stain removal method for every fabric known to man. I wore the sacrifices like a crown, and he praised me for a while. Said I was the glue, the rock, the backbone. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? But what I didn't realize was that in his eyes I was slowly becoming invisible, reliable, predictable, convenient. That's the thing about men like Richard. They don't fall out of love, they fall out of admiration. And when admiration goes, so does appreciation. They stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a system, a support beam, an appliance. And when a newer, shinier model walks into the office, one who hasn't packed lunches or scrubbed vomit out of car seats, they start imagining a different future. A future that doesn't include the woman who made their current success possible. I remember the first time I saw the change. He came home in a slim-fit suit, newer than his usual ones, a little flashier. He'd started wearing cologne again, the kind that gave me migraines. I joked about it. He brushed it off. Said Sandra had given him a sample from a firm event. Sandra. I'd heard the name before. Just another colleague. Another sharp, polished associate gunning for partnership. I thought nothing of it. I was too busy worrying about Olivia's SAT scores and my father's declining health. I didn't realize Sandra had been taking up residence in my husband's life, in his stories, in his phone, in his bed. The red flags weren't red at first. They were beige, easily dismissed, late nights, missed calls, client emergencies that always happened on weekends, locked phone screens when he used to leave them open, hushed tones on calls that ended when I walked into the room. Once I found a receipt for a dinner for two at a restaurant we'd always talked about but never gone to because it was too expensive. When I asked him about it, he said it was a client dinner. When I pressed, he said I was imagining things, that I was paranoid, that I needed to trust more. That's when the gaslighting began. And when the gaslighting starts, it's not loud, it's subtle. A slight shift in tone, a change in phrasing, an insinuation that your memory isn't reliable, that your emotions are unstable, that you're the problem. I started doubting myself. Was I overreacting? Was I too sensitive? Was I becoming one of those wives? But then I found the hotel keycard, and the necklace I'd never seen before, and the Uber ride receipts that didn't match his calendar. So I stopped asking questions. I started collecting answers. I consulted a divorce attorney, Marilyn Winters, a woman with steel in her voice and wisdom in her eyes. She told me exactly what to look for, what to save, what to prepare. He's counting on you being shocked when he finally makes his move, she said. Don't be. Be ready. So I was. I moved quietly. I transferred my inheritance into Olivia's name. I made copies of financial records. I met with a forensic accountant. I even got friendly with Richard's executive assistant Jennifer, who had a soft spot for Olivia, and eyes wide open about Sandra. I let Richard believe he had the upper hand. Because when someone underestimates you, they give you power. I didn't tell Olivia. Not yet. Not while she was preparing to graduate. I didn't want her memory of that milestone to be stained with betrayal. I thought I could protect her from it. I was wrong, but I tried. When he asked to bring Sandra to Olivia's graduation lunch, I smiled and nodded. When Sandra showed up at our family breakfast, I played the polite hostess. When Richard's mother hugged her like a daughter-in-law, I swallowed bile and poured more coffee. I became a ghost in my own life. But I wasn't dead yet. The weekend before graduation, I noticed something odd. Richard had started locking his home office. A room he never locked before, filled mostly with tax documents, case files, and golf trophies. He claimed it was because of sensitive firm paperwork, but I knew better. I knew his tells the slight downward flick of his eyes when he lied, the tightening of his jaw when I got too close to the truth. So I waited for the right moment. And on Tuesday, when he left for an early morning mediation, I fished out the set of keys I'd hidden years ago, back when Olivia was a toddler and liked hiding Legos in drawers. I unlocked the office. What I found wasn't shocking, it was confirming. There was a hotel receipt from the Waldorf dated 3 weeks prior for a 2-night stay. 2 guests, spa services, room service for 2 breakfast and late-night dessert. There were text messages on his iPad left open like he'd grown cocky. Not romantic messages exactly, but logistical ones. Coordinating outfits, dinner plans, Sandra's shoe size, his flight info for an upcoming conference that had never made it onto the family calendar. And then there was the draft letter. Untitled, unsent, but full of the kind of phrases you only write when you're preparing for something big. Alexandra will understand eventually. Olivia is almost grown. We deserve a fresh start. I owe it to myself. Owe it to himself. Not to me, not to Olivia, to himself. That was when I knew this wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was an exit strategy. He had been planning this for months, maybe longer, and still I didn't confront him. Because when you're playing chess with someone who thinks you're just a pawn, you wait until the king is in position. Then you strike. By Wednesday, I had finished preparing the envelope. It contained everything. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. Photocopies of credit card charges from cities where he had never been. Screenshots of messages. Evidence of asset transfers made under my name but routed to a shadow account. Most damning of all, a notarized letter from Mr. Abernathy, the managing partner of Richard's firm, confirming they had opened a preliminary investigation based on my anonymous tip. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted truth to have teeth. Friday night, the eve of graduation. Olivia and I stayed up late, curling her hair, steaming her gown, reminiscing about first-grade recitals and awkward middle school phases. She looked radiant, nervous, proud. I tucked her in with a kiss on her forehead, pretending my chest wasn't splitting open from what I knew was coming. The morning dawned bright and warm. I made blueberry pancakes. Richard sat at the counter in a navy suit, texting with a smirk on his face. I asked who he was messaging. He said Sandra. About where to find us at the ceremony. I laughed a little bitterly. It's a graduation, not a gala. He didn't respond. Instead, he insisted Sandra should sit with us, with the family. She has connections at Princeton, he argued. She's close to several board members. This could help Olivia. It was laughable, but I nodded. Because I needed this day to play out exactly as he'd scripted it. So I let him do it. I let him take control of the seating. I let him bring her to breakfast. I let him smirk and preen and whisper to her like I wasn't 10 feet away. Olivia noticed. Her smile dimmed. She kept glancing at me, eyes searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. When we arrived at the ceremony, I helped Olivia get into her robe and hat. I kissed her cheek and told her I was proud of her. Richard had already gone ahead. Said he had to check in with someone. I walked toward the family section, and there they were, Richard and Sandra, sitting side by side, laughing. She was wearing a soft blush dress, the exact shade I'd worn to his promotion dinner years earlier. Her hair curled in soft waves, just like mine used to be before I gave up blow-drying in favor of packed lunches and PTA meetings. And there, in the seat that should have been mine, her hand rested lightly on the armrest, occupying space in my life like it had always belonged to her. People saw it. You could feel the awkward energy radiating from the rows around them. Our family friends, our neighbors, even Richard's own sister, all darting glances and tight smiles. I took the empty chair on his other side, said nothing, and watched the ceremony begin. The speeches blurred into white noise. But then Olivia's name was called, and the world snapped back into focus. She walked across that stage like a queen, graceful, confident, brilliant. My daughter. My legacy. I stood and clapped louder than anyone, not for show, not for distraction, but because that moment belonged to her, no matter what. Afterward, we gathered for photos. Olivia hugged me first hard, whispered, "What's going on?" I kissed her temple and said, "Today is yours. We'll talk later." Then Richard clinked his glass and delivered his toast. He started with Olivia, praised her brilliance, her work ethic, her future. Then smoothly, cruelly, he pivoted. Today marks a transition for all of us. You could feel the room tense, glasses lowered, conversations stilled. As Olivia begins her new chapter, so do I. And then, like a magician pulling a knife from a bouquet, he said it. Sandra and I are beginning a new life together. There it was. The public detonation. The perfect performance. The crowd's stunned silence. Olivia's broken gasp. The crash of a dropped glass, but I stayed seated. Calm, steady. Because I had my own performance. And it was coming. I didn't blink. While the room recoiled from Richard's announcement, I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. That silence he thought would swallow me alive, I wore it like armor. "Congratulations on your honesty, Richard," I said, setting my glass down gently. "After 18 years, you certainly picked a memorable moment." His expression faltered. He'd expected an outburst. Tears. Screaming. A thrown plate. Anything that made me the unstable one. Instead, I gave him nothing. I robbed him of the narrative he'd rehearsed in that mirror so many mornings, the script where he was the brave soul escaping a bitter, hysterical wife. And then Olivia stood. Her chair scraped against the hardwood with a sharp screech that seemed to echo off every wall. Her voice trembled with fury, not fear. "How could you?" she asked, her eyes glistening. "Not just for what you did, but how you did it." Richard tried to speak. "Sweetheart, I didn't mean." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "You didn't just ruin Mom's life, you tried to hijack mine." Sandra shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smile now visibly strained. She reached for Richard's hand and he took it publicly, shamelessly. That's when I stood up. From my purse, I pulled out the manila envelope. Slim, neat, deadly. "I believe this belongs in today's conversation," I said, placing it in front of Richard like a gift box filled with vipers. "Consider it my graduation gift. For both of you." He stared at it. Didn't open it right away. Just looked at it like it might explode. He wasn't entirely wrong. Before he could find the nerve, Olivia turned to me. "I can't stay here." "I know," I said. "Go with Grandma and Grandpa. I'll be right behind you." My parents, bless them, had already stood. My father placed an arm around Olivia's shoulder. My mother, who had spent half her life trying to like Richard, looked at him with eyes like stone. In 50 years of marriage, she said softly, "I've never witnessed anything so breathtakingly selfish." And with that, the three of them left. Sandra watched them go, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was no longer the co-star of Richard's redemption story. She was the other woman at the crime scene. Emily, my closest friend, murmured something about giving space and pulled a few other guests toward the door. Richard's colleague Marcus mumbled an apology, canceled the champagne order, and followed. Soon only a few people remained. A waiter collecting glasses, the hostess pretending not to listen. Richard finally tore open the envelope. At first he looked confused, then pale, then furious. Inside were copies of bank transfers I'd made in secret, shifting our savings into protected accounts in Olivia's name, transferring my inheritance into a trust he couldn't touch. A notarized letter from Abernathy's office confirming a preliminary inquiry into Richard's irregular client billing. And then, just for flair, a screenshot of a text he'd sent Sandra. "Once graduation is over, I'll be free. She won't see it coming." Sandra leaned over, scanning the pages. Her expression shifted from smug to stunned in seconds. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Richard said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. He had played this like a corporate takeover. But I'd played it like a heist. He wanted freedom. I gave him a spotlight. He wanted to humiliate me. I gave him accountability. I turned calmly, gathered my purse, and walked out. I paused only to thank the server and leave a tip for the untouched lunch. Outside, the sun was still shining, life was still moving, and I was still standing. I drove straight to my parents' house, where Olivia sat on the porch, swing knees hugged to her chest. She looked up, eyes rimmed red, but said nothing. I sat beside her, letting silence wrap around us like a blanket. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "It's not your fault," she replied. "No, but I wish I'd seen it sooner." She looked at me, then really looked at me. "You did. You just hoped he'd change." We sat there for a long time. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't scream into pillows or curse at the ceiling. I made tea. I brushed my teeth. I pulled the covers over my body and I breathed. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. The following day, Richard showed up at the house. Alone. No Sandra. No flowers. Just a shell of the man he once was. He asked to talk. I said no. He demanded I stop spreading lies. I told him the truth didn't need spreading, it was already airborne. He threatened legal action. I told him to bring it. Then he asked pathetically if I would consider keeping things civil, for Olivia. The same Olivia whose graduation he hijacked. I didn't answer. I just closed the door. That week, I hired a second attorney. One for custody, even though Olivia was legally an adult. I didn't trust Richard not to manipulate or guilt-trip her into choosing sides. I wasn't going to let him spin this into a story where I was the villain. Sandra, meanwhile, had gone dark. No texts, no calls, no social media posts about new beginnings. Because beginnings born from betrayal don't last long, especially when they're built on lies. The storm didn't stop when I shut the door on Richard, it simply changed form. Gone were the grand performances and surprise announcements. In their place came emails, legal documents, and an onslaught of subtle and not-so-subtle tactics designed to wear me down. 3 days after Olivia's graduation, a courier dropped off an envelope that felt heavier than its weight. Richard had filed for divorce. Inside was a petition full of legal jargon and personal jabs dressed up as procedural facts. He claimed I had secretly transferred assets, emotionally destabilized the household, and interfered with his professional obligations. The audacity would have made me laugh if I hadn't already spent weeks preparing for it. I forwarded the paperwork to Marilyn, my divorce attorney, and added a note. "He's trying to bury me under paperwork. Let's return the favor strategically." Marilyn replied 5 minutes later, already on it. She was calm, methodical, and the absolute opposite of the woman Richard probably expected me to hire. He was banking on me choosing someone cheap and kind, someone willing to settle to keep the peace. Instead, he got Marilyn Winters, a legal tactician known for dismantling high-profile cheaters without breaking a sweat. The next phase was war, but mine was quiet. I spent my mornings reviewing financial records, sorting through 17 years of shared accounts and receipts. I flagged anything suspicious, highlighted duplicates, and found a pattern. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful emotionally, he'd been siphoning funds into accounts I never knew existed. Jennifer, his former executive assistant, proved invaluable. Over a quiet coffee one afternoon, she passed me a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me," she said, her eyes scanning the cafe nervously. "But you'll want to look closely at anything dated after Sandra joined the firm." Back home, I opened the files. What I found made my stomach turn. There were invoices for client dinners that never happened, hotel bookings tied to firm conferences that didn't exist, credit card charges labeled business expenses but clearly tied to personal use jewelry spa packages, and wine deliveries to Sandra's apartment. Sandra, the woman who smiled over pancakes at my daughter's graduation morning. The woman who shared my husband's bed, his schedule, and now it seemed his ambition to rewrite our family history as if I were some faded supporting character. But here's the thing about faded women: we don't disappear. We sharpen. We get loud in all the quietest ways. I sent Marilyn everything, and she built a case not just for divorce but for fraud. In the meantime, Richard tried his own psychological warfare. He flooded mutual friends with his side of the story, claimed I was unstable, that I was bleeding him dry, that I was poisoning Olivia against him. I saw the whispers take root when dinner invitations stopped arriving, when people I'd known for years started answering my calls with stiff politeness and quick excuses. Even Emily hesitated. Maybe try to be the bigger person, she offered one day. I stared at her. "Do you know what he did at the restaurant?" She winced. "I mean, yes, but maybe it's better not to fight." Better for whom? The social media war began next. Sandra posted photos of herself at a new apartment, my old throw pillows visible in the background. A caption read, "Sometimes love looks like starting over." Another post had a picture of her hand on Richard's knee at a vineyard. The ring on her finger looked awfully familiar. It should have. I bought it during a spontaneous trip to Napa years ago. For me. Each post was a knife, but I didn't let it cut deep. I saved them. Archived everything. Sandra might have been brave on Instagram, but she'd shrivel in court. The hardest part wasn't Sandra or Richard. It was watching Olivia navigate the wreckage. She started sleeping with her door closed, then locked. Her texts became shorter, her smiles rarer. I didn't push. I gave her space. But one evening, as I was washing dishes, she walked into the kitchen and said I blocked Dad's number. I turned off the water, drying my hands. She looked tired, older. "He said I was picking sides. I'm not. I'm just picking truth." I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her. "You never have to choose between us," I whispered. "But you can choose what's safe, what's real." Richard didn't stop. When emotional manipulation failed, he tried legal intimidation. His new attorney, some overly groomed man named Bradley Thornton, sent over a list of demands that read like satire. Immediate return of wrongfully transferred funds, temporary spousal support, shared ownership of the house, custody recommendations despite Olivia being 18. The man actually had the gall to argue that I had stolen the marital lifestyle and left Richard in financial distress. It was nonsense, but dangerous nonsense, because he had money, a firm, and arrogance. He thought he could exhaust me until I gave up. What he didn't realize was that exhaustion had been my entire life for the past 18 years, and I was still standing. So we pushed back. Marilyn filed for full asset discovery. We subpoenaed firm records. We requested his full tax history. And when he tried to drag his feet, the judge grew suspicious. I started noticing changes. Sandra's smile faded in the photos. Her Instagram captions became vague. Then the photos stopped altogether. 2 weeks later, Olivia told me she'd heard from a friend that Sandra had moved out. Apparently, she'd discovered the extent of Richard's financial entanglements and wasn't thrilled about the reality of being with a man facing multiple ethics investigations. Sandra was never in this for the long haul. She wanted the glow of a successful man, not the fallout from his decisions. And Richard, he started calling. Blocked numbers. Late nights. Once he showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a pathetic speech about remembering what we had. I didn't let him in, because I remembered exactly what we had. And I knew what it had cost me. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who smiled through clenched teeth at a court hearing pretending grace while plotting revenge. I wanted to be done. Done with the paperwork, the hearings, the lies dressed in legal language. But Richard wouldn't let it end quietly. And that meant I had to fight louder, not with noise, but with precision. The envelope had only been the opening shot. Now came the war of attrition. Richard's team attempted to delay discovery, claimed they needed time to collect documents. But Marilyn was relentless. She filed motion after motion requesting bank statements, client invoices, partnership contracts, everything that could prove Richard was living a double life, not just personally, but financially. And then it happened. A breakthrough. Eleanor Winters, our forensic accountant, a brilliant woman with a voice like silk and a brain like a mainframe, uncovered something Richard hadn't expected, manipulated partnership draws from the firm. Close to $640,000 rerouted into personal use over 4 years. Some of it tucked into Sandra's apartment renovation, some of it buried in false reimbursements labeled client development. The paper trail wasn't just messy, it was potentially criminal. Should we report it? I asked Marilyn during one of our late-night calls. She paused. Not yet. But the judge will see it. And so will his partners. We scheduled a hearing to present new findings. A routine procedural day turned into a gallery-worthy implosion. Richard entered the courtroom in one of his tailored navy suits, hair neatly combed, face freshly shaved, still trying to control the optics. He didn't see Sandra anywhere. That absence spoke louder than any affidavit. Judge Martinez, who had taken over our case from a colleague, wasted no time. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, flipping through a manila folder, "can you explain these discrepancies in your financial disclosures?" Richard glanced at his attorney, who suddenly looked like he regretted every hour billed on this case. Then from the back of the courtroom a door opened. Jennifer walked in, my not-so-secret weapon. She was calm, crisp, under oath, and devastating. Her testimony was simple, but explosive. She recounted emails from Richard instructing her to backdate receipts, reclassify expenses, and falsify reports under specific client codes that couldn't be easily traced. She produced copies, originals, metadata, emails that read like confession letters with timestamps. Richard's face went pale. When she mentioned Sandra's name linking her directly to multiple expenses billed as business development, the judge's brow lifted. "Miss Atkins, are you stating these personal expenditures were knowingly misrepresented to the firm as billable expenses?" Jennifer didn't blink. "Yes, Your Honor." Repeatedly. I objected. I was terminated 3 days later, and with that the courtroom shifted. Richard's attorney tried to object, but Judge Martinez silenced him with a look. "I've heard enough for now. Counsel will discuss evidentiary status shortly. But I'd advise your client to prepare for formal amendment of his disclosures, immediately." Richard looked at me for the first time during the entire proceeding. Not with rage, not even with contempt, with something worse. Recognition. He finally saw me not as the silent woman he once sculpted into background support, but as the threat he'd underestimated. As the strategist who had been watching and waiting. Who had used every dinner party, every fundraiser, every quiet moment to learn how he operated and use that knowledge when it mattered most. Outside the courtroom, his partners were waiting. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I saw it in their postures, closed off, tight-lipped, defensive. Richard tried to speak. One of them waved him off. Another shook his head. The third just walked away. That was the beginning of the end. Over the following weeks, Richard's defenses crumbled. First came the amended financial disclosures, too little too late. Then came a revised settlement offer. Gone were the demands for the house, the accusations of misconduct, the manipulative requests about Olivia. It was now a plea, a hope that I'd accept a mutual resolution. Marilyn smiled when she read it. He's cornered. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because one thing remained unfinished, Olivia. She hadn't spoken to Richard since graduation. Not directly. Not after that restaurant meltdown. Not after the social media posts. And certainly not after he tried to paint me as the villain in court papers. He tried to contact her, flowers, emails. Once a handwritten letter slipped into our mailbox. She read it silently, sitting cross-legged on her bed, then folded it and placed it in the drawer. He still doesn't get it, she murmured. Get what I asked, brushing her hair from her face like I used to when she was small. That it's not about the affair. It's about the betrayal of everything. Of me, of you, of our family. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Because she wasn't broken. She was building armor of her own. That weekend we visited the beach, the same one we used to go to when Olivia was 5, her pigtails bouncing as she chased seagulls. We walked quietly along the shore. No lectures, no drama, just space. She turned to me and said, "You didn't just survive this, Mom. You won." And that's when I realized this wasn't about victory over Richard. It was about victory over the version of myself who had stayed too quiet for too long. The one who thought keeping peace was more important than protecting truth. The one who thought sacrifice meant erasure. That version of me was gone. In her place stood someone Richard never saw coming. And that woman, she wasn't finished yet. The next settlement conference took place inside a smaller chamber with soft lighting and none of the drama of the main courtroom. But the tension, it buzzed under the skin like static. Richard was already seated when we arrived. No tie, wrinkled collar. The carefully polished mask had slipped. There were bags under his eyes, the kind you don't get from staying up late with clients, but from losing sleep, trying to keep your life from imploding. He looked at me with something between caution and regret. I didn't look back. Marilyn placed our file on the table, heavy and complete. Color-coded tabs marked each section: bank fraud, asset diversion, false expense reports, and ethical violations, all wrapped in a velvet glove of legal professionalism. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to threaten. The facts spoke louder than anything. Richard's attorney began with a weak attempt at salvaging dignity. We're proposing a 50-50 split of documented assets, spousal support for a limited time, and exclusive rights to Mr. Mitchell's pension plan in exchange for... Marilyn raised a finger without looking up. Let me stop you there. She opened the section marked Undisclosed Income, Cayman Holdings and Client Shell Companies. The printouts were brutal wire transfers, flagged tax irregularities, and internal memos from the firm's compliance team obtained through discovery. If you push this further, Marilyn said, we'll file for criminal investigation. That includes the Ethics Board and the IRS. The room was silent. Richard's attorney cleared his throat. What? What would your client accept? It was the first time he'd acknowledged me directly. Marilyn glanced my way. I nodded once. We want the house. Full ownership. No contest, she said. We want the college fund left untouched and legally firewalled. We want Alexandra's retirement funds restored and matched. No spousal support claims, no media releases, and formal withdrawal of every false accusation levied during these proceedings. And I added softly a written apology to Olivia. Not a performance. A letter. Richard's face broke. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just a slow unraveling. The quiet collapse of a man who built his life on control and realized too late that someone else had been quietly stacking the chessboard against him. I want this over, he said, voice cracking. Marilyn slid over a document. Sign here. Today. Or we go to trial. And trust me, your partners will be in the front row. He signed. And just like that, it was over. Not with a bang. Not with a courtroom shout. But with the scratch of a pen and the silence of defeat. I walked out of that room lighter. Not free, not yet, but unburdened. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the rope around my chest loosened. I could breathe. But Richard wasn't done trying to claw back what he lost. 2 weeks later, he sent a text. "Can we talk about the house? About Olivia? About us?" I didn't respond. A few days after that, he showed up at Olivia's campus during her freshman orientation. She didn't let him finish the sentence before walking away. Security escorted him off the grounds. The school put a note on his file. No contact without prior approval. Sandra, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. A mutual acquaintance told me she moved back to her sister's place in D.C. Word was she'd left the firm shortly after Richard's ethics review began. One of his ex-clients had apparently filed a complaint citing mismanagement of funds. I didn't gloat. Because here's the thing about winning in silence: you don't need to scream when the truth is loud enough on its own. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when grief crept in. Grief for the woman I used to be. The one who dreamed of vacations as a couple, not depositions as adversaries. The one who once believed in forever. I had to mourn her, but I didn't miss her, because in her place stood someone stronger. Someone who didn't confuse peacekeeping with self-sacrifice. Someone who had finally learned that boundaries weren't walls, they were bridges. The kind that keep you from drowning when someone else tries to pull you under. Around that time, Olivia came home for a weekend visit. We sat on the back porch watching the trees sway, the air thick with early fall. "He emailed me again," she said. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shrugged. "He said he misses who we used to be." I waited. I wanted to write back. She continued. To ask him, when exactly does he think that version of us ended? When he met Sandra? When he lied to us? When he humiliated you? She wiped her eyes. Or was it when he made me question whether any of it was ever real? I didn't answer, because I knew the truth. It had been real until it wasn't. Until he chose something else. Someone else. And Olivia. She was the collateral damage in a war she never enlisted in. "He doesn't get to define your healing," I told her. "That's yours now." He gave up that right. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. And I knew she meant it in 1,000 ways. For surviving. For staying. For not staying. For being the one thing that didn't shatter when the foundation cracked. Later that night, I opened the apology letter Richard had mailed her. I hadn't planned to read it, but curiosity won. It was short, hollow, carefully worded, full of, "I'm sorry you felt, and it wasn't my intention, and I hope you'll find a way to forgive me someday." There was no accountability, no real remorse, just another attempt to rewrite the ending. I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Some stories don't get happy endings, but they can get clean ones. And that's what I was finally building: a life that wasn't spotless, but honest. One decision, one boundary, one breath at a time. By the time the final divorce decree was signed and filed, the air in my lungs felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had stopped holding my breath. Olivia returned to campus with fresh resolve. She dove into her psychology classes, started volunteering at the Student Counseling Center, and even joined a small support group for peers dealing with family trauma. She told me once on a late-night phone call, "It's weird, Mom, I thought this was going to destroy me, but I feel awake." I knew exactly what she meant. Meanwhile, I started taking back the pieces of my life I had left behind. The guest room became my new office, freshly painted a warm cream with brass bookshelves and a standing desk. I dusted off my old marketing portfolio and relaunched my consulting firm, Mitchell Marketing Consultants, a name I reclaimed, not out of nostalgia, but because I'd earned it. At first, it was just a few clients, small nonprofits who couldn't afford big agencies. Then came referrals. By month 3, I had more business than I could handle. I hired a part-time assistant, then a graphic designer. For the first time in years, I wasn't organizing bake sales or drafting volunteer rosters. I was building something mine. But even with the success, the ghosts lingered. I'd walk into the grocery store and see Richard's favorite wine, hear a couple bickering playfully, and flash to the early days of our marriage. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and reach for the other side of the bed, forgetting it was empty. It wasn't longing. It was memory slowly fading into history. Sandra reappeared on social media around that time. A new profile private under a different last name. She wasn't with Richard anymore. Rumor had it she was working for a boutique law firm in Baltimore focusing on HR compliance. The irony wasn't lost on me. A friend who still kept tabs on Richard said he'd left his old firm. Something about too much noise around billing practices. He was doing freelance work now and, by the looks of it, struggling to maintain the lifestyle he once considered a birthright. I didn't rejoice. Because indifference is the final form of healing. But not everyone was indifferent. Richard tried one last time, this time through a carefully worded email. Alex, I know you won't answer, but I need you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. I was a fool. You didn't deserve any of it. If there's ever a chance to talk, I'll always be here. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then calmly I archived the message. No reply, no reaction. Because what he was asking for wasn't forgiveness, it was access. And he'd lost that privilege the moment he chose spectacle over integrity. The moment he humiliated me for convenience. The moment he made Olivia's graduation about him. My forgiveness wasn't something to be earned with a paragraph. It was something I gave to myself quietly the day I stopped hoping he would become the man he never truly was. Still, there was one thing I hadn't dealt with: the ring. The engagement ring Richard gave me all those years ago on a Brooklyn rooftop. I found it one afternoon in the back of my jewelry drawer, nestled in a box with a broken clasp. It wasn't a symbol of love anymore. It was a monument to who I had been. A girl with stars in her eyes. A woman who believed in permanence. So I sold it. And I used the money to fund a scholarship. The Alexandra Hart Resilience Grant, a $5,000 award for women returning to school after marital separation. The first recipient was a 43-year-old mother of 3 who had left an abusive relationship and was now pursuing a degree in social work. I met her for coffee after she received the funds. She looked me in the eyes and said, "This changes everything." No, she changed everything. I just gave her the permission slip. Back at home, Olivia came back for spring break. She walked into the kitchen one morning, still in pajamas, holding a Harvard acceptance letter. Full scholarship. Clinical psychology. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I found my path." I pulled her into a hug so tight neither of us could breathe for a moment. Then I whispered into her hair, "You didn't just survive this, Liv. You transformed through it." She laughed, wiping tears. I guess we both did. That night, we sat outside under a soft blanket, sipping hot cocoa. The stars were out. The wind gentle. The silence between us was no longer the tense quiet of uncertainty, but the peaceful hush of restoration. She asked, "Do you think you'll ever date again?" I smiled. "Maybe. But I don't need anyone to complete me. I'm already whole." And I meant it. Because after everything, after the lies, the public betrayal, the courtroom battles, I hadn't just rebuilt. I had evolved. Spring melted into summer, and with it, the last residue of what had once been my marriage. It wasn't rage that lingered now. It wasn't grief either. It was something gentler, quieter: acceptance. Not of what happened, but of what wasn't going to. Richard was never going to be the man I thought I married. And that version of me, the woman who had lived for his career, who built her life around his orbit, that woman didn't exist anymore. I began to fill my days with intention, not obligation. Mondays and Wednesdays were for client strategy calls. Tuesdays were for mentorship: young women, some recently divorced, some just unsure how to start again. Thursdays I kept for myself. Long walks, therapy, writing, yoga if I remembered. And Fridays. Olivia and I had standing calls. We'd talk about her professors, her latest group project, the weirdness of college dining halls. I looked forward to those the most. But something unexpected started happening around that time. People I hadn't heard from in months, people who had distanced themselves after Richard's carefully orchestrated exit, began reaching out. Not with explanations, not even with apologies, but with admissions. I didn't know the whole story. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I believed him and I shouldn't have. Some I ignored. Some I forgave. Most I simply let go. Because closure isn't about hearing the right words. It's about knowing you no longer need them. Meanwhile, Richard's silence stretched on. I'd occasionally see his name in an email thread related to legal loose ends, real estate documents, investment settlements. But there were no more personal messages. No more veiled pleas. Until one day there was something else. A voicemail. I almost didn't listen, but curiosity won. His voice was brittle. I know you won't want to hear this, but I've been thinking about everything. About Olivia. About the way I handled all of it. You were right. About everything. I destroyed something good because I thought there'd be more. And there wasn't. I miss what we had. I sat with the phone in my hand, letting his words echo in my living room. Then I deleted it. Because I didn't need a broken man's confession to validate what I already knew. What we had wasn't a lie, but it also wasn't enough. Not for me, not anymore. Later that night, I pulled out an old photo album, one from the early years. Birthdays, vacations, Olivia's first day of school. Richard in a wrinkled t-shirt holding a toddler version of our daughter, smiling like he meant it. I looked at those pictures for a long time. And then I did something unexpected. I smiled. Not because I missed it, but because I could finally see it without pain, without longing, just as a chapter. One that ended. One I had survived. One I had outgrown. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Harvard. Olivia's official move-in date was set. She'd be leaving at the end of August. We spent the summer making memories. Not performative ones. Real ones. We took a weekend trip to Portland. Rented bikes and ate too many donuts. Saw a movie in a tiny theater with only 12 seats. Laughed until we cried about a raccoon who stole our croissants at a lakeside Airbnb. None of it was curated for social media. There were no matching outfits or perfectly filtered shots. Just joy. Simple, unscripted, honest. On the day she left for Cambridge, I didn't cry at the airport. I waved, watched her disappear through security, and drove home with the windows down and the music up. When I got back to the house I had once feared would feel too empty without Richard, it felt perfect. Quiet, yes, but not hollow. I made dinner for one, opened a bottle of wine, lit a candle just for the smell of it. And then I sat down at my desk and began writing the speech I'd been asked to give at a local women's retreat. The theme, reclaiming your narrative. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then I typed, "Once upon a time, I thought the biggest betrayal of my life was my husband leaving me for another woman. I was wrong. The real betrayal was how long I believed my worth was tied to who I was to someone else." The rest flowed like breath. I didn't know if the women in the audience would see themselves in my story. But I hoped more than anything that they'd see something else. That rising from the ashes isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about finally choosing yourself, even if it's messy, even if it's late. Especially if it's late. The retreat was held at a converted vineyard nestled in the hills outside of town, the kind of place where time feels like it slows down. 40 women gathered in the main lodge, their chairs arranged in a loose circle, the scent of eucalyptus and warm bread drifting through the room. Most wore soft sweaters and hopeful eyes. Some were freshly divorced. Others were still married but unraveling silently. All of them were searching for something, strength maybe. Permission. I stood at the front holding my note cards but never once looking down at them. "I'm not here to tell you how to survive betrayal," I began. "I'm here to tell you that you already have." The room went still. I used to believe that keeping a marriage intact was a badge of honor. That sacrificing my voice for the sake of stability was noble. That love meant staying even when staying meant shrinking. I paused, letting that land. But I was wrong. What followed wasn't a lecture. It was a story mine. I told them about the restaurant, the toast, the envelope, the courtrooms, the deleted voicemail. But more than anything, I told them about the space between the destruction and the rebuilding. The messy middle. The silence that screamed. The mornings when brushing my teeth felt like an act of rebellion. The nights when I whispered to the ceiling I deserve more. Some cried. Some nodded. One woman stood up at the end and said, "You just told my story, but better." I smiled. "Then it's yours now too." After the event, I sat alone outside on the patio watching the sun drip gold across the hills. One of the coordinators brought me a slice of berry pie and said, "You should write a book." Maybe I will. Because there's something powerful about sharing your scars not as tragedies, but as survival maps. I drove home with the windows down again, the wind in my hair, a playlist of songs I used to love before I forgot what I liked. And then 2 days later came Olivia's message. A photo of her standing in front of Harvard's crimson banners, her acceptance letter in one hand, and in the other, a small bronze key. My dorm key. Feels like holding my future. I replied, "And you earned every step of it. I love you." She sent back, "Because of you." That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, but not lonely. The house no longer echoed with absence. It held peace, laughter in its walls, healing in its corners. And me still here, still standing. At 42, I was not who I thought I'd be. I was more, not because of Richard's betrayal, but because I chose not to let it define me. He built an ending, but I chose a new beginning. And it started with the moment I let him go, not with hatred, but with clarity. That clarity whispered something I'd never forgotten since. You are not what someone else threw away. You are what you decided to become after. If you're still here, thank you. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about a man who betrayed his family. It was about a woman, me, who stopped waiting to be chosen and finally chose herself. I know many of you have your own versions of this story. Maybe your betrayal wasn't a husband. Maybe it was a friend, a family member, a job. Or maybe it was the moment you betrayed yourself by staying silent, small, or scared for too long. But hear me when I say this. It's not too late to rebuild, even if the wreckage feels fresh, even if the ground still shakes when you try to stand. You are not broken, you are becoming stronger, smarter, sharper, softer in the right places, steel in the others. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't need permission. You only need this moment. The one where you say, no more shrinking, no more pretending, no more giving everything to people who give nothing back. And if you've already made it through your fire, then I hope this reminded you just how damn far you've come. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like blueberry pancakes made just for yourself. Or a new career started in a spare room. Or a mother and daughter laughing at a raccoon stealing breakfast. It looks like peace, like wholeness. Like a woman who, when everything shattered, learned to hold the sharp pieces carefully and build something unbreakable. Thank you for being here with me. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to exactly what you needed.